All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Talmo Pereira, and if we get that slide back up. If we could perhaps get the intro slides back up on the screen, we could. Let's start. Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry, it's not updating over here. All right. So, welcome to one of the last sessions of the meeting. In today's symposium, we're going to be talking about brain informatics in the AI era. And so, to give some context, I think we've all been observing how AI has been progressing extremely rapidly across all fields of science and engineering. We're seeing even in applications to, I'm not even getting into ChatGPT and the revolution that generative AI has provided, but what we're very quickly seeing is the adoption and translation of these technologies into the domain of the biological sciences. This year we saw the development of EVO. This is a foundation model for genomic data from the ARC Institute. And they're demonstrating how using the same kinds of technologies, given sufficient resources, you can achieve really remarkable capabilities. And I think one way to think about foundation models, given that they have so much potential, is the fact that they're able to absorb massive amounts of data and operationalize it. Like you do downstream tasks like, protein structure prediction. And going together with this this new trend of embedding lots and lots of data into more advanced AI models is the ability to not just use it for practical functional tasks, but actually now to turn and actually use AI to model biology itself, right? Where here we have a short clip from a very recent paper that came out this week by Diego Durando and colleagues on simulating entire animals. And if you were in the Embodied Neuro AI session this morning, you're aware of how exciting and how active of a direction it's quickly becoming. This idea of doing brain science on AI itself, right? And using AI as a predictive model and not just a tool. Simultaneously, though, AI is getting much harder to do, right? AI requires a lot of data. And if you're doing really unstructured tasks, it might be okay to get away with massive amounts of data scraped from the internet. But we're doing science, right? We need certain checks. We need certain guarantees on the quality of the kind of results that we get. And that requires standardization. That requires data integration, annotation, archival, and accessibility. And importantly, we also need not just a lot of data, but a lot of compute to go with it, right? All of these models, all these advances in recent years, and it might be a little bit hard to see there from the back of the room, but at the very top right, what we have is GPT-4 and related models, right? These models that are really demonstrating remarkable emergent capabilities, really only possible because industry labs, and you can kind of see the gradient there going from blue, academia, to red, industry labs are really dominating all the work in doing generative AI and really frontier level AI. So if we want to do that for real and at scale, we need to figure out a way to develop the resources and infrastructure to make use of compute, not just buy a lot more GPUs, but to make the ones that we currently have more available, easier to use, and have it talking to where our scientific data lives. So I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today, where we're going to go through a series of different slices and topics within how we actually make AI practical. So our emphasis will not be on new AI algorithms, but rather everything that goes around it. How do we make it accessible? How do we orchestrate it, connect it to the right resources? And how do we build the infrastructure to really advance science by bringing all these technologies together? And we'll end with a little panel on going over a few questions and with enough time, also some audience questions on where the next steps are and where the challenges lie. So with that, I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Liesl Marie for our first talk.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Hello. Hi, my name is Liesl. I work in Talmo's lab at the Salk Institute in San Diego. And one of the things that is it good? All right, great. Yeah, one of the things Talmo's lab does is develop a deep learning based pose estimation software. And we've been doing some work on trying to basically make this software more accessible and available to people. So one of the projects that we've worked on has been making like a cloud-based tutorial platform for quantifying behavior. And there's different aspects of that project that could be reused basically to increase accessibility to this type of software. With that, let me get started. So I'll start way back at what is the fundamental goal of neuroscience, and it's to understand how the brain generates these behaviors, right? And that's a tough aspiration on both ends of the puzzle. So what is happening in the brain, and also how can we objectively identify behavior? And we'll be focusing on that latter. How can we objectively identify behavior? For instance, by observing this lady, we can tell that she is outwardly happy and cheering, but how did we actually come to that conclusion? Well, a big helper was her appearance, right? She has her arms raised, big smile on her face, and some call this body language, but at the basis, we are observing the position of this lady's body to determine what she is doing. And before we move any further, let's just change our choice of words from objectively identify behavior to quantify behavior, because that's really what we mean here. And although we might be able to tell that this lady here is cheering from just this single image, much of the time behavior is more complex, right? It's dynamic and involves movement, which to accurately quantify, we would need information from previous timestamps or multiple frames or images. And although there's interest in how the human brain works, most of the time, at least for our software, people aren't necessarily doing experiments directly on people. A lot of questions are asked and answered by observing animals over long periods of time. So we'll take a look here and switch to this jumping spider who does this movement, right? He likes to move, and we want to quantify his behavior. So the starting point to quantifying behavior is to estimate the spider's pose. So in the past, we may have added a physical marker to the spider's legs, right? But we want to track not one, all of these legs, and a few other joints, which is a bit time consuming to attach all those markers. And now our spider starts moving again, and perhaps like one of the physical sensors pops off, right? And this spider, how does he feel about these sensors? Well, maybe he doesn't feel like moving around much. Maybe he feels constrained by these sensors and it's inhibiting his natural behavior. So we'll get rid of the markers and we'll decide to go markerless. And if we haven't already, we would add a camera. And more importantly, right behind this camera, we now use computer vision to find these key points for us. And this has allowed scientists to do some cool things, like this closed loop experiment where we can use real-time inference. And basically, we can detect when the male approaches a female fruit fly, and upon this detection, we can automatically trigger, in this experiment, it was just the light to turn on, and this would activate a rejection response from the female. Now, although using computer vision for pose estimation has opened the door for scientists to do experiments that maybe weren't feasible in the past, there is still somewhat a barrier to entry. And while these tools that use deep learning are powerful, just as a matter of fact of having deep learning as the core technology, it introduces a significant technical challenge to implementation. And we can't go around expecting that perhaps like a wet lab scientist that has all this knowledge and background in neuroscience or biology to also have an overlaid background in computer science. And I have actually met a surprising, I'm like, wow, there are a lot of people that actually do have this overlap at this conference, but we don't expect people like this. And that is why we developed Sleep, which is open source tool, originally created to give neuroscientists the ability to track animal poses, but is now in use to capture all forms of biological motion. And Sleep is just a general purpose deep learning framework for the entire pose tracking workflow, from raw videos to tracked poses of any number or kind of animal. And at its core, Sleep solves the problem of going from raw videos, right, to tracked landmarks of interest. And this is done by using deep learning and computer vision. Sleep is also being developed with accessibility in mind, which we'll touch more on in just a bit, owing to the efforts of multiple software engineers. Sleep is in use all around the world. And we can see, like, we've done some user-based analytics, and we see that there is a lot of interest in this type of research. Our user base does seem to be growing at the moment. With that in mind, let's go back to this accessibility part. So one of the things that we have done in the past, not the current project in hand, but we've tried to take in user feedback for what they think about things, and a lot of that is to do with the GUI, like how can we make it as easy to use as possible for our users, right? So that includes like adding features like this double click to label from prediction and drag and drop annotation. But to dig further into some of the accessibility issues that are currently still open, let's look at the workflow to quantify behavior using computer vision. And this basic setup includes a scientist, right, asking questions, observing an animal, or more accurately, using a camera to record an animal. And these recordings are then annotated in Sleep on a computer, which if we want to train a model locally, we need GPUs. And we'll focus on just the human-computer interaction for the time being. Now, practically, deep learning requires access to this expensive graphical processing unit, which accelerate the runtime performance of these pose estimation libraries, such as Sleep, by 100-fold or more. Well, what if we didn't have access to any GPUs? Well, we do have a workflow in place for that, but it's kind of like a roundabout way, right? We would ask users to upload their data to maybe Google Drive, where they would use a Colab notebook to train using Google-based GPUs that live on the Google Cloud. And then they would get either a model out or inference results out. They'd have to download that and then merge it back into their project. So this sort of framework, while it's doable, right, it's just really like a giant bandage over the fact that we need some GPUs, and currently having access to a local GPU provides the smoothest workflow for the user. And then that brings up another concern for accessibility, which is this download process, where currently all the modern pose estimation libraries require downloading software onto your computer, which, although developers like myself try to include support for everybody's setup that they have locally, this includes providing support for multiple different operating systems, but we still just can't seem to account for everybody's setup and just the little changes that everybody has, which does lead to some headaches for just those few unlucky users when they deal with these dependency issues. And that's a roadblock, right? Like, they're just going to get there, have some problems, and maybe go somewhere else, do another experiment, who knows, but it's limiting accessibility. And so if we take a look at the high-level workflow for sleep, we see that that middle portion of the workflow that includes network training, pose estimation, and tracking all require a GPU, which was one of our accessibility concerns. And then also the entire workflow, right, requires desktop software installation. That's our second accessibility concern. And so we're proposing to get rid of these difficulties here by moving sleep or just pose estimation, right, onto the cloud. And this would eliminate that need for the desktop installation and some of the dependency headaches that come with that. And it would also provide GPUs, cloud-based GPUs, as part of the main user workflow, not this roundabout way to get your pose estimation. So our work on this is still relatively new, but in our very first stages, our goal was to create a cloud-based tutorial platform where first-time users of sleep could easily have access to the entire sleep workflow, including that training, pose estimation, and tracking without any troubles. And so let's dive into how this cloud platform works, starting with the creation of virtual machines. So whoever is running a tutorial, which would be me, would start with this create VMs command, which is a command in a repo that we've created that basically uses an image which lives on the cloud, namely Google Compute Engine. And this image is just a set of instructions to create the virtual machine. And it will ensure that multiple virtual machines are created exactly the same and would have all the dependencies we need and the software we need. And after we've instructed Google Cloud to create these VMs for us, each virtual machine will run a script created by us on startup. And in this startup script, we tell each VM to run a background process. And this background process tells the VM to listen for a command from a user to connect to that VM. And the way we send this message is we use Google PubSub to allow communication between publishers and subscribers. So here the publisher would be when the user wants to connect, they'd publish a message, and the subscriber would be, every VM is a subscriber, or virtual machine is a subscriber. And so as soon as this VM receives this message, it knows it's ready to connect and it's go time. So after our VMs are created and their startup scripts have been run, we add each VM to a row in a database. We chose to use Google Cloud Spanner database, mainly because it handles concurrency for us. Say when multiple users try to connect to a VM at the exact same time, it'll ensure that no two users are assigned to the same VM. And in this database, it has two columns that we are interested in, namely the ID for which virtual machine is which, and that's the key identifier in our database, and also this command column, which is provided by Chrome Remote Desktop, which I'll get into as well. And Chrome Remote Desktop basically outputs a command for us, which allows unique users to connect to a virtual machine. And so at this point, our virtual machines are created, but then let's look at the user interaction, which starts with, how are users assigned a virtual machine? And the user would likely start at maybe like a tutorial website, but the starting point for getting the assigned a virtual machine would be to go to Chrome Remote Desktop, where they would receive a command that they can just copy and paste and hand over to us, where we store this command in our database. And we would, to determine which row this command would go in, we would basically look for any virtual machine that is currently unassigned or doesn't have a command next to it, right? And would find an unassigned VM and then insert the command in that row. And we'd use Google PubSub to do this publish and tell our VM that it's ready to run the command. The user wants to connect. So then the VM would look in the database, find the command, run it, connect, and it would now be the virtual machine a user would now be ready to connect. So after the user hands the command off to us, they would be ready to access this virtual machine, and the user would again head to Chrome Remote Desktop site, where they should now be able to access their virtual machine via an in-browser desktop interface. And after everyone has their VM assigned, we begin quantifying behavior on the cloud, where we can connect 2 or 3 or 6 or just however many people to a virtual machine with GPUs and dependencies already installed. And so this is the very specific, like, running a tutorial on a cloud, but the part here that is to be reused in the future is doing this assignment of how can people get access to the GPU, and how are we assigning people to the GPU to do this training for them. And doing this on the cloud makes it kind of like extremely scalable, where we can just allocate more resources for users and assign them as needed. So after this tutorial is over, and whether or not everyone's logged off, or we manage the resources, so it's important to delete virtual machines that we spin up, and this is just done by me again, delete VMs. And this just tells Google Compute Engine to delete all of the virtual machines we've created. And that's the full flow of the tutorial platform, with the key technologies being Google Cloud Platform, namely Google Compute Engine, to host the VMs, with Google Spanner in conjunction with Google PubSub to facilitate this assignment between the user and virtual machine, and also Chrome Remote Desktop to allow the user to remotely access the virtual machine through an in-browser desktop interface. And in summary, just the flow is creating the virtual machine, subscribing, adding these virtual machines to the database, where they can then be assigned to users and kept track of. Then we can allow users to connect and quantify their behavior on the cloud without need for installation or the GPU hardware being local, deleting those virtual machines. And then I do have this thank you slide for everyone that has worked on it in my lab, and namely Ramiz and Andrew in our lab have done a lot of work on this as well. Before I hand it off, oh, okay, yeah. Thanks for listening. Do I have any time for a quick demonstration?
Let's do a quick round of applause for Lisa.
Okay, yeah, we've got 2 minutes, so I'll just show you like a quick interaction. Give me 1 second. Okay, nice. So this is Chrome Remote Desktop, which does a lot of this GUI interface for us at the moment. And the user would come here, click begin, next, authorize. And this is a command they would copy to their clipboard. And then we have just like a VM assignment form where you enter your email and also just paste your command in, would hit submit, and it would give you your VM details, where you would just head to this remote desktop access, which is actually on the same site, just a different tab. And then let me make sure that all the VMs that I have are there. Great. We would come in here, and there would be a PIN to enter, which is provided in that form submission, just right here. I would enter that, and it'll pop up with my virtual machine, which I did get started training before I started giving this talk. But yeah, as you can see, it has everything there that you would need to start quantifying behavior. And the tutorial platform was really just to give first-time users access to this. But if we can reuse some parts of this platform for actually handing out GPUs for people to use in the main user workflow, just access through a browser using GPUs. That's kind of the mindset of where we want to go with it. With that being said, I think that's my time.
Awesome. And yeah, Liesl is being very understated. This has been a super transformative tutorial platform. I think it really meets one of the key issues that we have when trying to do the training, to disseminate this technology, is having the infrastructure to run it, right? So we've been able to do this in real time with upwards of 100 people working on the platform at the same time, and even with classrooms full of 6th graders who are able to just get on and just get training their AI models, all as part of like a classroom level activity. So big win. Right. So next we have Jeremy Magland, and take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeremy Magland, and I'm excited to talk to you today about some browser-based tools for collaborative visualization and analysis of neuroscience data. I believe that even if data and software and compute resources are technically available, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are attainable. And what this kind of graphic is supposed to depict here is that there's a lot of fruit on this tree, but the ladder only goes up so far. So we talk about making data publicly available, which is great, but as probably many of you have encountered, if you have a data set that's in an archive, it might be there might be obstacles to downloading the data, first of all, converting it to the correct formats, incorporating into your software, or if somebody points you to a GitHub repo with some software, it's likely, even if it's very well documented, that it's going to take some time to install, and these are all sort of obstacles to having this be accessible. So what I would say that, as I said, if data processing software, visualization software, and compute resources are all available, that's just the first step. They need to be accessible, usable, and shareable, and I believe only then does the science become open, verifiable, reproducible, collaborative, etc. So I'm going to showcase 3 browser-based tools that I've been working on that aim to address this need, and I would say that these tools aren't like the solution to this issue, but I just wanted to share this as sort of an example of how this could be done in a way that really allows, fosters collaborative science in these ways. So the tools are FigureL, which is a way to share interactive figures in the browser, NeuroSift, which is a way to also browser-based way to explore the DANDY archive, an archive of neurophysiology data. Satra will talk more about that later. As well as NWB format file visualization, and then a very early stage tool called Dendro for browser-based analysis of neuroscience data in the cloud. So I think we all agree that visualization is very important. So it serves many purposes, just data exploration, quality control, being able to identify outliers, be able to communicate results. Visualization is really key to all these different stages of the science flow. And I would say interactive visualizations, as the data becomes more complex and larger, have more parameters and everything, that interactive visualizations really become especially important. Gaining intuition about data sets that just a static figure would not really be able to communicate that. When you're sharing some results, sometimes it's just required that your collaborator not only sees a static image, but then has the ability to kind of go further and interact with it. Unfortunately, in my experience, advanced interactive visualizations are usually not accessible, usable, and shareable. So for example, if I told you, oh, I have this really cool software that allows me to view this data set, I'd like you to see the data set, I'd like you to use the software, and I gave you a link to a GitHub repo, Well, what's the likelihood that you're going to do that? I mean, hopefully you would, right? But it would take some time, and I think that a lot of opportunity for collaboration would be lost in just that process of trying to get the visualization to open. And there's issues as well beyond just installation of just transferring data. Maybe the data set is very large. I want you to see what I can see on my computer. Am I going to have to transfer the whole data set to you? So maybe you're thinking of like Jupyter Notebooks. There are a number of solutions that try to solve this problem. I'll just point out some of the limitations of Jupyter Notebooks. So they're great for the purpose that they serve, but for the full functionality, they usually require a running backend server with like a Python client, a Python kernel. So those can be expensive to maintain, slow to load, and difficult to configure. And also the views are mingled with the source code, which on the one hand can be great for reproducibility, but on the other hand, it can be cluttered, and when you share something with somebody, sometimes you just want them to see the same thing that you're seeing without having to execute cells and things like that. So NeuroGlancer, probably many of you are familiar with this software, takes a client-side only approach, which has a big advantage where I can share a link with you or a QR code or something like that. So in this presentation, I'm going to be brave and actually try to click a link to open something on the internet. So we'll click to open this, and there we go. Now, there was no installation required. We have a 3D view of this FlyEM HemiBrain dataset from Genelia, and I can start rotating in 3D. So that's sort of what we're aiming for. That's the type of collaboration that I'm trying to, I believe is going to be important. So NeuroGlancer, on the other hand, has some limitations. It's a specialized tool. It's only suitable for certain types of data. And also importantly, it requires, there's friction on the creator side. So if I have a data set that I want to share with you on NeuroGlancer, I've got to prepare it in a certain format, and then I've got to have the cloud infrastructure to be able to upload it to a cloud bucket or host it on some file server. So although it's no friction for the recipient and the consumer of the data, there is friction for creating and sharing it that way. Of course, if you do have pipelines set up already, then this can work, but that does require infrastructure to be in place. So FigureL and NeuroSift are visualization tools that have the following in common. Kind of like NeuroGlancer, they run in the browser, no installation is required, entirely client-side rendering, and then they use what I call the clickable hyperlink approach, where you share views just by sharing a URL, which can be emailed or messaged over Slack, etc., or even linked in a publication, perhaps. So they integrate naturally with cloud resources, and they're designed, again, to be low friction for both the creator and the viewer of the data. So FigureL, the idea here is that you have a Python script. Typically, when you want to create a visualization, you're running Python, you execute a command to generate a figure, and then you see that figure on your own machine. So the idea here is to intercept that, and instead of creating the image on your desktop, it uploads some data to the cloud, and then you get a URL, which you can then either view in your browser or you can share it with somebody else. And it's flexible in that developers can create custom interactive visualization plugins and host those in the cloud. So here's an example. It's a pretty trivial example, but here's Python script, and instead of plotting it in a notebook, I just create a URL, and this is the URL down here that was created. Again, I'm going to be brave and click on that. And here we go. There is a rotatable Plotly figure here. So I could just send a QR code. Now, there's other mechanisms for hosting Plotly on the web, but what we're getting at here is a minimal friction approach. So I didn't have to log in. It just brings you to the figure. So here's a more useful example. So like spike sorting and neurophysiology data. Here's a link that I could share with you. I'm not going to be brave and click on this one because more things that need to load down onto the browser. But here's an example of spike sorting units table that's synchronized with these autocorrelogram views, cross correlograms, spike amplitudes, unit positions, unit similarity matrix, and then other quality metrics and everything like that. So this is built into a pipeline at the Allen Institute, and so they're using this for visualization. Again, it's just as simple as clicking, and then you have all this interaction. Here's another example of a different view on spike sorting output, where you have a raster plot on the top, which is synchronized with spike amplitudes on the bottom. So if you have an example of some phenomenon that you want to share, generate the link and give it to somebody else that they can open. So the architecture here is pretty simple. The Python script generates the figure, it creates the URL. At the same time of creating the URL, it uploads the blob of data that's needed for the visualization up to a cloud content addressable storage database. Right now it's publicly available, and just cross my fingers and hope that people don't abuse it at this point. But there's a limited amount of data that you can set up, and then if you're using it heavily, then you can set up your own cloud database for that. But for just trying things out, you can just generate a figure. The URL, when you click on it, it combines the blob of data in the cloud with a visualization plugin, which is flexible, and you get the view. So here's a breakdown of what the URL would look like. figurel.org, v query parameter equals a pointer to, in this case, it's a visualization plugin hosted on Google Cloud. And then here's the hash of the piece of data, and click on that link and it just combines the two. So here are some miscellaneous examples. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I will just choose one of these randomly. So let's try spike sorting data set. Okay, so yeah, this is the one that I was showing before. So you have all these different views, autocorrelograms. Click here, spike amplitudes, and I can click on one of these autocorrelograms and see the amplitudes associated with that. And again, this is something that's shareable. And since we've been talking about sleep, this is not part of the sleep software at all, but this was an example prototype of just something I put together that shows that perhaps you could just share a link to a pose estimation. So again, just a very rough prototype there. Okay, and I'll just share one other example. This animal position from Lauren Frank Lab. So they're using this to be able to view synchronized views of like the animal speed, decoded probability of state, and then that's synchronized with this animation. So you can see the time point on these graphs coincide with the position of the animal together with the probability field of where they're imagining being on this track. Okay. So going on to the next piece of software, which is similar in spirit, it's NeuroSift, and its purpose is to browse the Dandy archive and then also to be able to view NWB files, both local and remote. And Satra is going to talk a little bit more about what these technologies are in more detail. But basically, you can go to the Dandy archive, navigate to one of these NWB files that represents a session in a neurophysiology experiment. There's an integrated menu here where you can select Open in NeuroSift, and then it brings you to this web application, and I'll click on this link here. And what we can see is that we can graphically and interactively browse the contents of that file. So this is significant because NWB files on Dandy are usually many gigabytes. Sometimes they can be hundreds of gigabytes in size. So without this type of tool, you would have to download that data, install some software, and figure out how to view it. Whereas what I'm sort of proposing is that we develop more of these kind of client-side browser-based tools where the data is lazily loaded from the remote server. So only the pieces of data that's needed can come down. So if I click on, for example, this electrical series, I can then see a single channel of this ePhys experiment, and then I can scroll through different channels and things like that. So here's a more useful example of a PSTH, where you can interactively click on units and get the histograms in this way. So this is developed in conjunction with Catalyst Neuro. So there's various visualization plugin types that are supported. You could go to the GitHub repo to see a table of examples of how each of these neurodata types in the NWB file on Dandy are supported in that way. And the idea is that we would expand this list to support all of the different types. So it's also a Dandy Archive Explorer. So one great thing about Dandy is that the REST API is open. So you don't necessarily have to always use the web interface that is part of that project. But here's an example that shows how neurosifts can be used to kind of just browse through these different data sets. I'll just click one of these randomly. You can see that you can go to an NWB file, and that brings you to neurosifts, and you can start browsing and interacting with it that way. Okay, so the last tool that I'm going to mention, so this is the one that's at the earliest stage. There was a prototype of this, and then we restarted and created a new prototype. And at this point, we're going to create a third prototype, because this is much more difficult to, it's not just reading and visualization. This is actually what we're proposing to do is process data in the cloud in a very low friction way. So there are a lot of systems for doing cloud analysis and processing, but what I'm trying to do is keep the spirit of just go to a website, just click, run the processing, etc. So ideally, we should be able to select a data set from Dandy, select the processing steps that we want to apply, configure a compute resource, which might be hosted by us, or it might be some external resource that's publicly available, select the parameters, launch the analysis, track and monitor the running process, visualize the output, and perhaps upload the results back to Dandy. So there would be no local installation needed. Now, I would say that this doesn't work for all pipelines, because many of these cutting-edge pipelines really require a lot of custom software to be installed, a lot of parameters to be set. So this is more for mature pipelines that we want to set up and automate in this way. So again, the early stage web app, you go to dendro.vercel.app. So please don't actually go there, because again, it probably can't handle the load at this point, but it will soon. Soon it will. So right, so you go to the website, you click to create a new project, you then associate that project with a Dandy set, you then select to import certain NWB files that are in that Dandy set that you want to process. You then select a compute resource. So again, this could be something that you're hosting on your local machine that's connected into the system, or maybe it's on your compute cluster of your institution, or maybe it's using AWS resources. So, or it's a public resource that you have permission to access. So you select the compute resource, you then click here to run spike sorting, and then you specify the parameters that you want to run spike sorting with, submit the job, monitor the output here, and then visualize the results using Neurosift or a similar software. And then finally, step 8 would be uploading the data back to Dandy. So some of the advantages here is the separation of concerns. So I believe that a compute resource should not be tied to the software, right? It just should be a resource, right? A lot of times it's hard to configure, like I need access to a GPU, okay, I need to get my software installed on that GPU, I need to do all these things. What we're trying to accomplish here is a separation of those concerns where you independently select a resource, and then there are Dendro apps that then can run on that resource. So I would like to acknowledge that there's other tools, certainly many that offer these advantages, but Dendro specifically is going to be tightly integrated with Dandy, NWB format, and tools like Neurosift. So in summary, even when the data and the software are available, they may not be easily accessible, usable, or shareable. And what I'm proposing is that we move towards browser-based solutions that ideally don't require installation of software, so that we can share results, share processing, share resources, and fostering more open, verifiable, and reproducible science. So I'd like to thank these integral collaborators, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you. That was awesome. Next up, for our last talk of the session, we'll have Satra Ghosh, and then we'll transition to the panel. But Satra, take it away.
Thank you, Talmo. It's easy to follow Lizzle and Jeremy. I mean, they show all the fancy tools out there. So I'm going to kind of talk about the plumbing underneath a little bit that enables these kinds of tools to be built that make it easier for people. And when we think about AI in the neuroscience space, AIs are machines. They need to be able to do all of these things that Jeremy and Lizo were trying to show. So let me start as 1, 2. Some AI will eventually take this over and do this.
I think the slide on the projector isn't updating.
All right. So when we think about AI for neuroscience, we're thinking about AI as theories. This could be models, experimental designs, AI for biological applications, clinical, behavioral, AI as tools, instruments, protocols, analytics, AI for data, multi-scale, multi-species, knowledge generation. And we're looking at the entire kind of space of neuroscience, from subcellular to whole brain, across a set of modalities. What infrastructures can do here is enable search, visualization, and computation, collaboration and connection, and fairness and efficiency. When we think about AI as any of these things, they have to be enabled to do all of these things via infrastructure. So today, I'm going to cover 4 different areas. I'm going to talk about complexity of neuroscience a bit. This is not going to be new to people, but to those of us who build tools, those of us who are not in the labs, the complexity can be overwhelming at times. So I want to talk a little bit about how an AI agent or an AI model has to think about the complexity of neuroscience. I'm going to then switch to what Jeremy was talking about, Dandy as an infrastructural space and a set of features that helps enable AI for neuroscience. I'm going to end with a set of challenges. We have a long way to go still, and what the future might bring for us if all of this plumbing, all of the tools could fit together in a way that enables seamless interaction with the space. Here's an example of a NeuroPixels workflow. Now, I'm not going to go into every single piece of this. The intent of this to say every scientific experiment involves a complex protocol, and it involves many steps. And if we are thinking about AI involved in neuroscience, it needs to understand these steps eventually. And to understand those steps, it needs to be represented in a way that's accessible to both humans and machines. We can all read this, we can all go through it, and if we have neuroscientific knowledge, we might understand what these steps are. This is where standardization kind of comes in. And here's going to be an example of a standard that helps represent that complex protocol to convey to both humans and machines. So we are leveraging a lot of things in Neurodata Without Borders. You've heard about NWB. And it enables an ecosystem around it. It enables a set of tools that are close to the data format. It allows people to convert data to NWB easily, to process it, etc. And because this ecosystem has been built, it allows other people like Jeremy to build tools around it, tools that allow you to interact with the data once the standard is. But the key to this standard is it represents information like neural activity, information about details of data acquisition, experimental design, details about the subject that is being imaged or recorded from, and behavior. And this is important. It's a structure that enables all this kind of information. And it's structured, which means computers can play with it. Let me take another example. This was a preprint. It was published last week. This takes an example of a human brain, an ex vivo human brain, which may have had functional imaging prior, and goes through all the way through clearing, expansion, to get at cellular level data. And if I look at this entire workflow, again, it's simplified in this picture as stages, but there's a lot of complexity that happens. If we are looking at data at the end, an AI system has to understand what happened to data all the way through. And if I expand out just this last stage, that itself is another complex workflow, one that looks at different pieces of this. Now, when we think about AI in neuroscience, we have to have systems that are capable of doing these things. I would say we are not quite there yet. But this is the kind of complexity that we deal with. Again, this kind of data can be standardized. And one of the standards we're using for this is OME and ZAR together. And it stores different kinds of data together in a format that's accessible to computers, that's accessible and stores multi-pyramidal schemes of these visualization images, and allows for common scalable storage both in the cloud and locally, that now you can do visualization, just like Liesl and Jeremy were showing, in the cloud directly on data, and as well as parallel processing, which is going to be essential for the kinds of AI tools coming online. So one of our infrastructures that was mentioned was Dandy. It's a BRAIN Initiative supported repository that we run. It houses currently over 800 terabytes of data, and it's growing. And this we see as a collaboration ecosystem for neurophysiology projects. It's a place where you can store data, right? None of you should shy away from storing raw data. And I'll come to the types of data in a little bit. Once that data are there, then tools like NeuroSift and Dendro become instantly accessible. And that starts changing things, because now you can think about pipelines that are not just interactive pipelines, but also automated pipelines, AI tools that can sift through the data. You're searching for things in the data space. Over the last few years, Dandy has grown significantly. But what I want to talk about over here is the diversity of data. When I again think about AI and neuroscience, right now, we do a lot of things where we narrow down the search space, create a set of data on which we build AI models. I want to envision a future where these tools are building models, are understanding what data is stored in these archives directly. And we're seeing lots of different data set sizes. We're seeing different experiments with different numbers of subjects in there. And we're seeing data across 15 species or so. Now, most of us probably can look at a data set and say, oh, this came from a mouse and this came from a monkey. We want that kind of operation to happen directly through machines operating on these data sets. So multi-species, multimodal, accessible worldwide. That's what an infrastructure needs to do, and we think this infrastructure does that. It is also open, completely programmable. The reason Jeremy could build some of the tools is because it's not built just for humans to browse. It's built also for machines to work with. And again, if I think of AI, we need a programmable interface. And I'm going to encourage everyone here who builds tools that you have to have your system be accessible in a way that a programmer or a programming tool can work with. Because it's an open infrastructure, we were able to very easily repurpose it for another BRAIN Initiative project in the BRAIN Connects called Link. The same exact infrastructure, but this time used in a private space. So same infrastructure used in a private space, which means the same kinds of tools that work with Dandy could work with a private repository that's meant for this particular project. And this benefit for reuse allows us a lot of things. So open shared infrastructure has lots of benefits. Other people are testing these tools, and we get to benefit from what they find as not being useful. It's also being used by the Knowledge Space project in Europe because it's an open RESTful API. they can search data sets on Dandy and expose it to all of their folks in Europe. And finally, Sabera Talukdar, and this is not the first time she has used data sets on Dandy, she builds AI models and makes them accessible. So this is allowing domain general processing of time series where one of the domains happens to come from the brain and is neural in nature. But this is where we kind of come back to this level of data. I love this picture from the Brain Initiative Cell Census Network. Data is not one thing, it's many different things. And we have to be able to understand the different levels of data, information, and knowledge that's represented across repositories in the neuroscience space. Which also means that we need infrastructure to have not just read operations, which is the examples I showed you earlier, right? The folks in the knowledge space could read Dandy. Sabera could read the data in Dandy. But as Jeremy said earlier, we also need to be able to write back to Dandy. And that's important. It's a closed loop system that allows not just reading data, but writing back data as one processes. And one example of this is another Brain Initiative funded project. It's called the OpenScope, which is run at the Allen Institute, where they have proposals coming in to run experiments at the Allen Institute. When they run these experiments, they share the data on Dandy, and everybody can go to the people who are running those projects can go to Dandy to retrieve the data. They can go to a Jupyter hub to work with the data. And this OpenScope data book itself is a Jupyter book that's both educational in nature. It introduces people to data, but also provides this access to the data sets and how to process the data in the cloud. So that's one example of a read-write system. The other read-write system you saw intro to was Dendro, created by Jeremy, where it's not just read-write, it's compute and community powered. Now, AI in this future era, as Talmo introduced in the slides, I would say, I'm at MIT, I don't have the resources I see on that top right of that chart that Talmo showed. Most of us don't. So we need a way to integrate compute resources across institutions, possibly, and a centralized system like Dandy might allow that kind of interaction where people can bring their compute to the data. But there are many challenges. AI requires multi-scale, multimodal, representative, and usable information. I'm highlighting in bars in this kind of scale space diagram of biology the kinds of data Dandy stores. There is data in many other repositories. And what we are missing right now is a search layer that goes across this. And that's going to be important because if something, an AI, comes to this and wants to introspect data that's connected across these repositories, we need that search space to happen. But it's really exciting to have this. At least as humans, we can go to these places and get data that's relevant to us right this minute. The second thing that AI needs to contend with is we live in different ecosystems. And I'm taking an example of a data set that's published both in Dandy and in OpenNeuro, because there are two different domains of people. On one side, you have neurophysiologists. On the other side, you have neuroimaging folks. These are two systems that don't always interact with each other. When AI comes to them, does it understand all the challenges that each of these domains faces? And AI needs to consider what's inherent in these systems, and it's on us on how to integrate these systems together. The third challenge that I'm going to talk about is growing scales of data. Now, many people here probably have heard of NeuroPixels. It's a fantastic probe. It's just growing in density as time goes on, which means we're getting from terabyte scale data sets to petabyte scale data sets potentially in the next 5 years. How do we deal with such data? So I've shown a little image of transfer time over some current standard internet connections. To move a petabyte of data would require about 86 days on a 1 gigabit connection. That's not the internet over here, I think, right? It's about a day in 100 gigabits connection. And that's not the internet that most people have, even at their institutions. So when we're talking about these scales of data and how AI is going to play with it and deal with it, we need to understand an infrastructure that helps support it. And centralization is one piece of that solution. Decentralization or distribution might be another piece of that solution. So how do I think about the future? I showed you that there are many data archives with lots of data. For AI to play with that kind of data, it needs to have the metadata that goes with it, not just for humans, but also for AI to work with it. And that means we need it to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Much easier said than done in the current state of things. We're all kind of working towards this space, and we've come a long way. There's more data that's fair today than it was 5 years back, or when the BRAIN Initiative started. And the BRAIN Initiative has put in all kinds of resources to make more data fair. But we still have to keep improving some of these things over time. We also have to make more data available, easily discoverable, and usable. And these are challenges that we are facing still right now. Not all data we see is usable. And that's not because of standardization. We're getting that correct. We're getting data into standardized. But this is about the quality of data, the information that's attached to data, the metadata, the provenance, the experiment that was done. That's not always there. And we need to be able to work with it. And sometimes it's just instrumentation. A bad sequence on an MRI scanner or a bad neuropixels probe is going to give unusable data. And so we need to be able to sort through that and work with it. But I'm going to leave us on this futuristic thought process. Currently, we do things, it's the no AI agent space. Maybe the AI agent can become an assistant. Maybe the AI agent can become a collaborator. And maybe the AI agent can become a scientist. This was described as a space of agents that can learn to work with data, that can help us and assist us in different ways. I'm going to look at level 3 and go, if you get there, let me know. I want to know where we are. But right now, we're at that level 0 space for most part. But I think the technology, and this is the wonderful space of current both neuroscientific and AI technology, will get us to level 1 pretty soon. We will be able to do a lot of things that are going to be enabled by the set of tools coming online in the AI world. So I'm going to end with complexity is part of what we do. And standardization helps reduce the cognitive load, helps software developers understand that complexity better, and we absolutely have to work with it. Infrastructure needs to be read-write with rich metadata. I know many people think about read. It absolutely has to be read-write. That's how the web was constructed in the first place. We've just moved away from it through a lot of centralization and dissemination components. Currently, data are noisy, sparse, in disconnected ecosystems. That's a challenge we need to solve. So if we are looking at the future of BRAIN Initiative infrastructure over the next 5 years, we need to be able to make it not noisy, not sparse, and much more connected. And finally, the future of this might lie in fair data being always available, interactive systems that work with it, and AI agents. Now, there is a future. When we look at something like ChatGPT, I use it now to hold conversational dialogue with somebody in a different language. When will we be able to do this with data that's being generated in the neuroscientific space? How far are we? And that's the promise of AI. And I don't think we're terribly far off from some of this. We are already seeing AI agents be able to explore spreadsheets and other things. The focus is on business problems, not neuroscientific problems. Can we change that focus to work with the kind of data that we work with? So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it back to Talma.
Wow, that was really amazing, really inspiring work. So we're going to transition to our panel discussion now. And I want to start by just kicking us off with a couple of thought-provoking questions. And then we can probably take some audience questions, time willing. So to kind of get us going here, I want to ask you guys, well, you're all software developers and maintainers, right? And as teased by this very relevant XKCD comic, a lot of the work that we build, especially in open source software, typically does rely on, reusable, but oftentimes kind of potentially shaky and under-maintained foundations, right? We often rely on little pieces of software, and as we begin to build more infrastructure, like the types of things you've seen, we need to have a plan for maintaining them. So what do you guys think as developers is necessary to support open source software maintenance, given its increased importance in science?
Yeah, so that's an important question because many projects start and get started and they serve a very specific purpose in a lab, but then often after a couple of years, that software is no longer supported and it can't be relied upon. Now, I don't think that it's reasonable to assume that every such project would have long-term maintenance because that would just be too many. But I think we need to think more about an overall system where pieces of software can fit into larger frameworks and then be supported as part of such a system.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Yeah, I guess I'll add on to it. Kind of going off of what Jeremy has said is like the maintenance sometimes outlasts the personnel, right? The need for maintenance outlasts the personnel sometimes. And personally, I know that it does take a lot of time to handle all the support requests. And so,
That's the
really,
next slide, yeah. We'll see that in a second.
Yeah, really to handle that, we just kind of need people who allocate their time to, do the support work. And furthermore, I feel like, no, I think I'll end there. And then, yeah, sorry, I wanted to change the topic. Sorry.
Yeah, Satcher?
I think one of the things we miss a little bit in this country is this group of research software engineers. It actually kind of provides pathways for many scientists who are not going to be faculty members to work on tools and help maintain some of these things over time. Mm-hmm. This has grown in other places. Again, funding schemes and other things are quite different in different places, but as a community, kind of thinking about the computational engineer who can help build and sustain this ecosystem is something we need to start thinking about across the space of projects that exists.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as a very early stage investigator who was very fortunate to receive support from the BRAIN Initiative to do this thing. Thanks, Ming. It was really this is really the core thing that makes it possible. We have to develop new work, but riding on top of that is always the work to maintain the stuff that already exists. And I think that if there's going to be one thing that the BRAIN Initiative can move towards to continuing to support this stuff is indeed to provide explicit support for career paths like this, right? Where our RSCs can help a lot. Kind of normalizing, I think, having different models of collaboration, including with industry and with consulting organizations that can provide more specialized engineering support, and just frankly, some of the plumbing, right? We support things like viral vector cores. Surely we can appreciate the value of maintaining this one little piece of key infrastructure software that everything depends on, This could be even as rote as just updating dependency versions, making sure that things are still compatible when a new version of Mac OS comes out, right? Essential things to ensuring the long-term continuity and reproducibility of the work that leverages AI tools. Okay, we're gonna do one more very related question since we started broaching the topic. But after this, if there's folks in the in-person audience who have questions, we can kind of skip over to that. Otherwise, we have a few more kind of pre-prepared. For this next one, turning to our panel again, you guys support the users of your platform. What are the biggest pain points that you see in the scientific user experience? And to motivate that, we have here a daunting amount of user posts in the Sleep GitHub discussion board, just illustrating a very small subset of what you'll see as many pages of user requests for help, from everything from how do I get this thing to install, or I have a bug, or everything's working fine, but I have some questions anyways about what to do next, right? You don't just put the thing out there, as Jeremy alluded to, right? You can't just drop a link to a GitHub and say, go for it, right? There's a lot more that is involved actually getting AI into people's hands and actually getting it to produce new science, and not just asking every single grad student that wants to use a new tool to learn everything from scratch just to use it. So why don't we start with Liesl?
Yeah, so I think personally what I've seen in like these support requests are people, namely, trying to get started, and maybe they've run into some difficulty and they just, don't know where the starting point is. So that's where I feel like being able to ask a question, right, and get an answer relatively fast is a lot better than just sitting there and struggling for who knows how long. Personally, I've seen the most common case that I feel like people run into, and the question that I get asked is like, how do I know when my model is good enough? Or the case where their model doesn't perform and they're like, I've labeled, hundreds of frames, like what's going on? And it's like, stop labeling, let's just tune your hyperparameters. And being able to ask that question and then given an answer like, let's just change these parameters here, run it again, and it performs well. I think that's extremely helpful.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of different types of issues, and I've been able to kind of address a lot of them. But the one type of issue that I haven't been able to address is I'm using Windows. Now, of course, that's going to depend on what type of software you have. I have like Linux, Mac heavy software, but that's why I've kind of gravitated towards browser-based solutions. And as I mentioned in the talk, of course, it's not always possible to do that, but installation is sort of the most frustrating and disappointing kind of aspect of these issues, because it's just discouraging when the user wants to use the system but can't get it installed because of certain dependencies or certain things that you didn't anticipate. So I feel like that's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a story for this one.
Perfect.
And it has to do with, most of you are probably funded by the BRAIN Initiative or NIH, and there's a data sharing and management plan that comes with it, and you have to upload your data, and sometimes to Dandy Archive. So somebody reached out and said, I don't know NWB, I have never coded in Python, and how do I get my data into Dandy? Okay, we have said that we'll respond during the weekdays, nights and weekends are off limits for us from a support team perspective. So we waited till Monday. And this person came back and said, I went to ChatGPT and asked it to convert data, write me code to convert my data to NWB. Right? And then I ran into some issues. And I think that's the space we are seeing now, where some of these tools are becoming assistants to people who may not have the set of capabilities we are looking at. So again, we're talking about neuroscience in the AI era and informatics. So I think this was a classic example of someone, and this person now has picked up Python along the way. So there was also an educational component that came along with this person, and we were able to help and isolate certain issues that that came along. But that initial step is now a reduction for somebody to go there and be able to get at something. And I did this myself just to see how GPT would respond to it about a year or so back. And it wasn't good. It made up all kinds of code that would have never worked, and you could just see it. But that itself has changed a lot. And so we are living in an era where the world around us is evolving at a very rapid rate. And we have to understand what these systems are capable of doing and how we can best utilize them. And I think both in the context of help and support, we can integrate some of these tools because they're still under guided conversations to help address some of these issues that come up in these forums.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, clearly you see we have like quite a lot of content associated with interacting with our users. And as a little experiment, we did try setting up a custom GPT that used our documentation, our technical documentation as a data source. And it does get quite good, actually. But, it does take some elbow grease to kind of get it compatible with the way that it can talk to the LLMs. But I fully agree, right? Just like foundation models in general serve as a good repository of knowledge that can be used directly for the science and also be used in support of the tools that enable the science. Totally agree. And it'd be awesome to be able to reduce some of our own human burden of answering people's questions by having, say, an easy way to integrate assistants like this that talk science and can interoperate with the software. Why don't we, just do an audience question.
My question is mostly related to Liesel's presentation and I guess to Jeremy's last comment. So as we transition to these tools in the cloud and kind of software as a service, do we see this transition in conflict with still having the tools to be able to run locally if we have the GPUs? Or do we think that, because I imagine that is maintaining more systems even, or hey, being able to install it in that Windows older version. So how do you see that future?
Yeah, that's a good question because, we don't want to kind of get rid of this desktop interface, at least for the time being. That's not how we see things going. It would be nice to have desktop installation, right? Say if you're in an environment where there might not be internet. Maybe you're taking a flight, right? And you want to do some work and you don't need to be connected to the browser. That being said, I think that it's a valid concern to be maintaining two things at once. So perhaps, we might eventually move, our graphics to the browser, but not have it be like accessing the cloud. So you can be like local hosting in the browser, be annotating in there. That is not set in stone, though, is what I'd say.
And just to clarify, from the perspective of let's say, the open sourceness of it, would it be harder to make small modifications if everything moves to the cloud?
Wait, sorry, can you say that again?
If we move the software, to run in the cloud only, do you think that it will become harder for users who have just enough knowledge to tweak little things to do so? I'm not so familiar with development for the cloud, so.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can jump in for that, and it's a really valid concern, and we've thought a lot about that, right? Because to host stuff on the cloud, you end up having like a centralized, maybe like service or server that runs on a code base that the author controls. If now we want to be able to allow other people to be authors, now they need to be able to spin up their own things on the cloud with their own modifications. That's a lot harder. And part of what we're trying to do is, I think, explore this kind of hybrid model where there is a desktop interface that you can do whatever you want with it. And there's going to be, even when we have more browser-based things that we can also, the user has more agency over, but maybe move some of the thornier parts that are unlikely to be user-level code off to the cloud. And this is part of it's our little graphical aid for like was going to be our next question, but this is equally as relevant. I think this is a great paper that kind of illustrates the fact that the ML code, the piece that in fact most users I think would actually want to interact with, is really only a small part of the much bigger picture of a machine learning enabled system. But I'd love to also kick it over to Jeremy real quick for any quick thoughts before we take another audience question.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is an important point. You don't want to lose the ability to run things locally as well. And so that's kind of why I mentioned the importance of separation of concerns when it comes to compute resources. That you you put things in the cloud, which is great for convenience in many situations, but it would also be important to be able to just switch it up and run it locally.
Yeah, and to that point, I also just want to add that there is some really exciting work being done in the web technology space with WebAssembly, Web GPU, things like Pyodide, all these things that are leveraging really, really modern, cutting edge web browser-based technologies to bring more, of the capabilities that you have in desktop-based numerical computing. But we need support, I think, to build that infrastructure and really enable these new capabilities. Question?
Hi, thank you for a great panel. And I thought it was really, this graphic is amazing. So as Satra mentioned, the NIH Data Management Sharing Plan, I think most people will have those questions. And so since you all are here, what would you recommend a regular NIH biomedical scientist to do in those data management sharing plans in terms of proposing a research engineer, a computational engineer to be part of their team? Now, just to be realistic, you don't want to propose $1 million budgets, and have just a small R21. But what would you think would be an ideal strategy for NIH researchers to propose? Because I don't think people realize that they can propose budgets to support infrastructure for data sharing. And what would be the ideal? And especially for the BRAIN Initiative, is there a more harmonized way to do it? Thanks.
Yeah, Satra?
I think this will have to be a partnership between NIH and other institutions in many ways. So just as Talmo mentioned, viral vector cores or other cores that exist, because you don't necessarily always need a full RSC for every project. So what that distributed space of responsibilities look like is going to be a function of an institution, as a function of a consortium, if it's a U19 or a center in the context of an NIH proposal. And I think it's important to think about, and this is going to be a challenge, which is we know what salaries are out there for software engineers. And there's a huge mismatch right now in what happens. So it has to be a coordinated effort to build up that kind of a biomedical workforce that helps with everything turning digital essentially past acquisition.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one more comment to that, and then we'll go to the last question, and then we'll be out of time. But yes, I very much appreciate it, and I take a little bit of objection with some of my experimental colleagues who often remark to me like, "Oh, great, you're computational, right? You don't have any costs. It's really cheap, right? You don't have to pay for animals or anything." Have you seen how much software engineers cost? Because I think our costs are comparable usually, if not larger. So that's something that also needs to be acknowledged within the funding system. Let's do one last question, and then we'll wrap up.
So, hi, great panel. Satra, you mentioned a little bit at the end of your talk about quality and quality control, and I think that's going to be crucial here when combining all of these data sources and then plucking out conclusions from things. If we end up comparing apples to oranges, it gets really dicey. Do you guys have any idea how to implement quality control throughout this process?
Great question. And it cannot be right at the level of the data. It has to be all the way upstream from data generation. And I tend to kind of think about quality control in industrial labs, right? There's quality control, there's quality assurance. There are different ways of thinking about quality. And we don't bring in all of those pieces all the time in those complex workflows at every stage because they take up resources, they take up time. And it's often a balance of the set of resources and how much time you put in towards doing this. What we can start doing is kind of bringing tools more upstream, right? So we can start with these data archives as a starting point for evaluating quality. That's all in the digital space. And maybe as those tools get better, we can start bringing them up. So I'll take neuroimaging as an example. So there's a toolkit out there that helps neuroimagers kind of evaluate quality of MRI data when they do analysis. Now, how good would it be if it was on the scanner itself at the point of data collection where this tool ran? And this is, again, I think, a space where AI, just because of the speed of some of the things that can be run, can be helpful in that space. But I also say quality is in the eyes of the beholder sometimes. And that's a community discussion at a scientific level. I know Jeremy deals with spike sorting, and many people in this room probably do. That's a whole space of quality control and quality assurance that I think will require more than the few minutes left in this panel.
Yeah, but I'll say that I think that a key one is to really ramp up our reporting standards, right? Where if we just have more metadata associated with each one of those processing steps, it's at least, you can interrogate it, you can inspect it, you can validate it. And if there are issues associated with the quality control, hopefully it'll be at least, there will at least be indications of that present in that metadata. And so in our last little graphic here, which, probably is not super legible, but that's kind of what I want to get at, is that this is an example of a model card from Meta AI's segment anything model. This is a foundation model. It's pre-trained to do image segmentation in many contexts. And what they've done is not only did they release the model weights and just said everybody go to town with it, but rather they also spent a lot of effort to document the properties of the model following reporting standards. They had a data set, data sheets. They had the protocols they use for annotation. All these little pieces which are not necessary to run the model and reuse the tool, but are essential for understanding the kinds of inductive biases and sources of structural errors that might occur there. So you can't inspect Facebook, you can't do QA, QC on Facebook's data set directly, perhaps, but by having enough documentation about the process that generated it, you can at least have some intuition for where the weaknesses and biases might be. It's also a place for us as scientists to document where we've cut corners, where we've made assumptions, and that way we can actually get back to doing the science, because we could spend a lot of time on really shoring up our QA/QC pipelines, but an alternative is document where the gaps are, and the next person who's going to use it can then assess for themselves whether it's important for them to redo an experiment, revalidate a particular processing step, and so on and so forth. Okay, so with that, I want to conclude and take a moment to thank the BRAIN Initiative organizers for allowing us to have this space and time. Thank the panelists for all their incredible expertise and for sharing the work that they've been doing. And thank you guys for listening. So join me in thanking all these folks again. And I want to, for the virtual audience, just want to thank you guys. Also thank all you guys here for attending the BRAIN meeting. And mention this concludes the content for our virtual audience. Now for our in-person attendees, that's to remind you to please join us next door where the posters are being held for the Meet the Funder session in just a few minutes. All right, thanks guys.